thought she was alone on the prairie, until a silent shadow stepped into the light, and everything she believed about danger and destiny changed forever. What she doesn't know is that this single moment will decide the fate of families, tribes, and her own heart. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The Texas prairie stretched endlessly beneath the scorching afternoon sun of 1867, its golden grasses swaying like ocean waves in the persistent wind. Sarah Coleman knelt among the wildflowers that dotted the landscape near her family's modest homestead, her fingers carefully selecting the brightest blooms for her mother's table. At 22 years old, Sarah possessed a natural beauty that seemed to belong to this untamed land. Her auburn hair caught fire in the sunlight, and her green eyes held the determination of someone who had learned to survive in harsh frontier territory. The Coleman family had settled here 3 years ago, drawn by the promise of land and opportunity after the war had torn the nation apart. Her father, Thomas Coleman, worked tirelessly to cultivate their small farm, while her mother, Margaret, did her best to create a semblance of civilization in this wild corner of Texas. Sarah had 2 younger brothers, Daniel and Matthew, who helped with the livestock and dreamed of adventure beyond their small plot of land. As Sarah gathered the delicate purple flowers that grew near a cluster of rocks, she hummed a melody her mother had taught her as a child. The sound carried across the open plain, mingling with the whisper of wind through grass and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't notice the shadow that fell across her path until it was too late. Sarah looked up and gasped, her basket of flowers tumbling from her hands. Before her stood a man unlike any she had ever seen, tall and powerfully built, with bronze skin that gleamed in the sunlight and long black hair that moved with the wind. He wore traditional Comanche clothing decorated with intricate beadwork, and his dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her heart race with equal parts fear and something she couldn't quite name. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Sarah's mind raced with every terrible story she had heard about Comanche raids, about settlers taken or killed, about the ongoing conflicts that plagued the frontier. She should run, she knew, but her legs refused to obey. Instead, she remained frozen, caught in the gaze of this stranger who had appeared as if summoned from the very earth itself. The man spoke first, his voice deep and measured, speaking English with an accent that marked him as someone who had learned the language through trade and necessity. "You are far from your home, flower woman." Sarah swallowed hard, finding her voice with difficulty. "This is my land, my family's land." A slight smile touched his lips, though his eyes remained serious. "The land belongs to no one. The land simply is. We walk upon it, we live upon it, but we do not own it as you white settlers claim to do." "Who are you?" Sarah managed to ask, her voice steadier now despite the thundering of her heart. "I am Dakota of the Penateka Band. My people call me chief, though that is your word, not ours. I lead my people as my father did before me, and his father before him." He gestured to the flowers scattered at her feet. "You gather these. Why?" Sarah glanced down at the spilled blooms, then back at him. Something in his demeanor suggested he meant no immediate harm, though she remained cautious. "For beauty, to remind us that even here, in this harsh place, there is something lovely to be found." Dakota studied her for another long moment, then did something unexpected. He knelt and began gathering the fallen flowers, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he collected each bloom. Sarah watched in amazement, unsure what to make of this gesture. When he had retrieved them all, he held the basket out to her. "Beauty should not be wasted," he said simply. Sarah took the basket, her fingers briefly brushing against his. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she quickly pulled her hand back. "Thank you," she whispered. Dakota stood, towering over her once more. "This land is dangerous for a woman alone. There are others, both of my people and yours, who would not show kindness. You should stay close to your dwelling." "Are you warning me or threatening me?" Sarah asked, finding courage in her curiosity. "I am telling you truth. The world is not always gentle, especially not here, not now. There is much anger between our peoples. Much blood has been spilled on both sides." His expression grew distant, troubled. "Too much blood." Before Sarah could respond, The sound of horses approaching made them both turn. Her father and brothers were riding hard toward them, rifles drawn. Thomas Coleman's face was red with fear and fury as he pulled his horse to a stop, the animal's hooves churning up dust. "Get away from my daughter!" Thomas shouted, leveling his rifle at Dakota. "Father, no!" Sarah stepped between them instinctively, surprising herself with the action. "He hasn't harmed me. He was helping me gather flowers." "Step aside, Sarah," her father commanded, his voice tight with tension. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." Dakota raised his hand slowly, showing he carried no weapon, though Sarah noticed the knife at his belt and knew he could be dangerous if he chose to be. "I mean no harm to your daughter or your family. I came to speak with the white settlers in this region. There are matters that must be discussed." "We have nothing to discuss with Comanche raiders," Daniel spat, his young face twisted with hatred born of fear and stories. "Not all of my people raid your settlements," Dakota replied calmly, though Sarah detected an edge of frustration in his tone. "Just as not all of your people honor the treaties made. But the violence continues, and innocent people on both sides suffer." Thomas kept his rifle aimed at Dakota, but Sarah could see the conflict in her father's eyes. He was a fair man despite his fears. "What is it you want to discuss?" "There is to be a gathering 7 days from now, at the old trading post near the river. The army commander has requested that leaders from both peoples meet to discuss peace. I am here to ensure that settlers in this area know of it, so that no one acts in ignorance and ruins what small chance we have." "And why should we trust you?" Thomas asked, though his rifle had lowered slightly. "You should not," Dakota answered honestly. "Trust is earned through actions, not words. But I am here alone speaking to you rather than raiding your home. That is a beginning." The tension hung thick in the air, broken only by the wind and the nervous stamping of the horses. Finally, Thomas lowered his rifle completely, though he didn't put it away. "We'll discuss it. As a family. Now I suggest you leave before someone else sees you here and doesn't give you a chance to explain yourself." Dakota nodded once, then his eyes returned to Sarah. "Remember what I said, flower woman. Stay close to your home. These are dangerous times for everyone." Before anyone could respond, he turned and strode away across the prairie with a grace that spoke of someone completely at home in this landscape. Within moments, he had disappeared into a small draw, leaving Sarah and her family standing in confused silence. "What were you thinking, Sarah?" Thomas finally exploded, his fear manifesting as anger. "He could have killed you, he could have taken you." "But he didn't," Sarah said quietly, still holding her basket of flowers and unable to shake the memory of those dark eyes studying her. "He helped me gather my flowers and warned me to be careful." "That doesn't mean anything," Matthew interjected, though he sounded less certain than Daniel had. "He's Comanche. They're the enemy." "Are they?" Sarah found herself asking. "Or are we all just people trying to survive on the same land, scared of each other?" Her father's expression softened slightly as he looked at his daughter. "The world isn't that simple, Sarah. I wish it were, but it isn't. Now come on, let's get you home before your mother discovers you were out here alone and has both our hides." As they rode back to the homestead, Sarah kept glancing over her shoulder at the prairie behind them, wondering about the Comanche chief who had appeared so unexpectedly in her life. She couldn't explain the strange feeling that had settled in her chest, part fear, part curiosity, and part something else entirely that she didn't dare name. That evening, as the family gathered around their simple wooden table for supper, the encounter dominated the conversation. Margaret Coleman was horrified to learn her daughter had been alone with a Comanche warrior, while Daniel and Matthew argued about whether they should have shot Dakota on sight. "That's enough," Thomas finally said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "What's done is done. The question now is what we do about this gathering," he mentioned. "You're not seriously considering going?" Margaret asked, her face pale with worry. "I'm considering that maybe, just maybe, this is a chance to end some of the violence. God knows we've all seen enough of it." Thomas looked around at his family. The Carsons lost their oldest boy last month in a raid. The Hendersons had their barn burned. And I know for a fact the Army Patrol killed 3 Comanche women and children by mistake 2 weeks ago, thinking they were warriors. This has to stop somehow. Sarah listened quietly, her food forgotten. She thought about Dakota's words, about the weariness she had seen in his eyes when he spoke of blood spilled on both sides. He hadn't seemed like a savage or a monster. He had seemed like a man carrying the weight of his people's survival on his shoulders. "I met him," Sarah said suddenly, and everyone turned to look at her. "I actually looked into his eyes and spoke with him, and I don't think he wants this violence any more than we do." "Sarah," her mother began, "I know it sounds naive. I know you all think I'm being foolish, but there was something in the way he spoke, in what he said. He called me flower woman, and said beauty should not be wasted. Does that sound like someone who wants nothing but death and destruction?" The days following Sarah's encounter with Dakota passed with agonizing slowness. She found herself constantly distracted, her thoughts drifting to the Comanche chief and the strange connection she had felt during their brief meeting. Her mother noticed her daughter's preoccupation and worried constantly, while her father spent long hours discussing the proposed gathering with neighboring settlers. Sarah continued her daily routines, but everything felt different now. When she helped her mother with the washing, she found herself scanning the horizon. When she tended the small vegetable garden behind their house, she listened for sounds beyond the familiar. The prairie that had once seemed simply wild and beautiful now felt alive with possibility and danger in equal measure. 3 days after the encounter, Sarah was drawing water from the well when she noticed something wedged between 2 stones at its base. Her heart quickened as she reached down and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. Inside, she found 3 perfect eagle feathers bound together with a strip of rawhide, along with a small carved wooden flower that fit perfectly in her palm. She knew immediately who had left it. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the kind of work that spoke of patience and skill. Sarah held the wooden flower up to the light, marveling at the detail carved into each petal. It was a faithful reproduction of the wildflowers she had been gathering that day. Her fingers traced the smooth surface, and she felt her cheeks flush with warmth. "What's that you've got there?" Daniel's voice startled her, and she quickly closed her hand around the objects. "Nothing. Just something I found," she said, perhaps too quickly. Her brother's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Sarah, if that Comanche has been around here again, I found it by the well, that's all. I don't know how it got here." The lie felt heavy on her tongue, but she couldn't bear the thought of her family taking these gifts away from her, or worse, using them as an excuse to hunt Dakota down. Daniel looked unconvinced but didn't press further. "Father wants everyone inside before dark. There's been talk of raiding parties moving through the area. Keep close to the house." That night, Sarah lay in her small bed, the wooden flower hidden beneath her pillow. She ran her fingers over its smooth surface in the darkness, wondering what it meant. Was it simply a kind gesture, or did it signify something more? And why did the thought of seeing Dakota again make her heart race with anticipation rather than fear? The next morning brought news that changed everything. A rider came to the homestead at dawn, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. Sarah and her family rushed out to meet him, fearing the worst. "There's been an attack," the rider gasped, accepting the water Margaret offered him. "The Morrison Ranch, about 10 miles south. Comanche raiders hit them just before dawn. The family's alive, but they lost most of their livestock and the ranch house is burned." Thomas's face hardened. "How many raiders?" Morrison said maybe 8 or 10. They came fast and left faster, heading west toward the hills. The rider looked around at the gathered family. "Every able-bodied man is being called to join a militia group. We're meeting at the Henshaw place in 2 hours. The Army patrol is supposed to meet us there, and we're going after them." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She watched her father's expression shift from shock to grim determination, and she knew what he was going to say before he spoke. "I'll be there. Daniel, Matthew, you'll stay here and protect your mother and sister." "But father," Daniel protested. "No arguments. I need to know they're safe while I'm gone." Thomas turned to Margaret, taking her hands in his. "Keep the rifles loaded and stay inside. I'll be back as soon as I can." As her father prepared to leave, Sarah pulled him aside, her hand gripping his arm tightly. "Father, what about the gathering? What about the chance for peace?" Thomas looked at his daughter with sad eyes. "That's 4 days away, Sarah. Right now, people are hurting and scared. I have to do this, to protect our neighbors and our home. But I promise you, if I get back in time, I'll still consider going to that gathering. And what if the raid wasn't done by Dakota's people? Sarah pressed. What if there are different Comanche bands and you're hunting the wrong ones? What if you destroy any chance of peace before it even begins? Her father paused, clearly troubled by her words. I don't have answers, Sarah. All I know is that I have to try to help. That's what neighbors do on the frontier. We stand together. Sarah watched him ride away with a heavy heart, fear gnawing at her insides. She thought of Dakota, of his words about blood being spilled on both sides, about innocent people suffering. What if her father's militia encountered Dakota's band? What if violence erupted when it could have been prevented? The day passed with excruciating slowness. Margaret tried to keep busy with household tasks, but her worry was evident in every movement. Daniel and Matthew took turns keeping watch from the roof of the house, their rifles always within reach. Sarah found herself unable to focus on anything, her mind spinning with terrible possibilities. As evening approached, Sarah made a decision that she knew was dangerous and probably foolish, but felt necessary nonetheless. She waited until her mother was occupied with preparing supper, and her brothers were both on the far side of the property checking the livestock. Then she slipped out of the house, moving quickly and quietly toward the prairie. She headed toward the place where she had first encountered Dakota, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The setting sun painted the grasslands in shades of gold and amber, and shadows grew long across the undulating terrain. She knew she should be terrified out here alone, but instead she felt driven by a purpose she couldn't fully explain. You did not heed my warning, flower woman. The voice came from behind her, and Sarah spun around to find Dakota standing there, his presence as sudden and silent as before. In the fading light he seemed almost otherworldly, a figure perfectly suited to this wild landscape. I had to find you, Sarah said breathlessly. There's been a raid. The Morrison Ranch was attacked this morning, and now my father has gone with a militia to hunt down those responsible. They're meeting with an army patrol and they will hunt any Comanche they find, whether they were involved in the raid or not, Dakota finished, his expression grave. This is what I feared. The cycle continues. Violence begets violence, and innocent people on both sides pay the price. Was it your people? Your band? Sarah asked directly. Dakota's eyes met hers with fierce intensity. No, my people are camped 15 miles north of here, preparing for the peace gathering. We have not raided since the invitation came from the army commander, but there are other bands, warriors who do not trust the white man's promises and will not attend any gathering. They strike out of anger and desperation, because their hunting grounds grow smaller every year, because their children go hungry, because they have seen too many broken treaties. I don't want my father to die, Sarah said, her voice breaking. And I don't want innocent people to die either, on either side. There has to be a way to stop this. Dakota stepped closer, and Sarah could see the conflict playing across his features. Why do you care, flower woman? Why do you risk coming out here alone to find me? Your people and mine have been enemies for longer than you have been alive. Because I looked into your eyes and I saw someone who wants the same thing I want. Peace, safety, a chance to live without constant fear. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she spoke. And because someone has to try to break this cycle. If we all just keep hating and killing each other, when does it end? For a long moment, Dakota studied her face, and Sarah felt that same strange connection she had experienced during their first meeting, a sense that despite all the differences between them, something fundamental and true existed in this space they shared. You are either very wise or very foolish, Dakota said finally, though his tone held a note of admiration. Perhaps both. Come, we must move quickly. I will take you to my camp, and you will speak with our council. If your words can convince them, perhaps we can send riders to intercept your father's militia before blood is shed unnecessarily. You would take me to your camp? Won't your people? My people will do as I say because I am their chief and they trust my judgment. But I warn you, flower woman, not all will be happy to see a white settler in our midst. You must be brave and speak from your heart, as you have done with me. Sarah nodded, her mind reeling at what she was agreeing to, but knowing she had no other choice. My name is Sarah, Sarah Coleman. I would prefer if you called me by my name rather than flower woman. A slight smile touched Dakota's lips. Sarah, he repeated. her name sounding different in his accent. It means princess in the Hebrew tongue, does it not? A fitting name. Come, we have far to go and little time. Can you ride? Of course I can ride. I'm a Texas settler's daughter. Dakota whistled softly, and a magnificent paint horse appeared from behind a rise in the prairie, its coat a striking pattern of brown and white. He swung up onto the animal's back with fluid grace, then extended his hand down to Sarah. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, allowing him to pull her up behind him. Hold on, he instructed, and Sarah wrapped her arms around his waist as the horse sprang forward into a gallop. They rode hard across the darkening prairie, the wind whipping Sarah's hair back from her face. She had never experienced anything like this. The power of the horse beneath them, the strength of the man she held onto, the vast openness of the land flying past. Despite the danger and uncertainty ahead, she felt more alive than she ever had in her 22 years. As they rode, Dakota spoke over his shoulder, his voice carrying back to her. You should know that what you are doing is dangerous beyond measure. If your people discover you have gone to a Comanche camp willingly, they may never forgive you. If my people decide you are a threat or a spy, I may not be able to protect you. I understand, Sarah called back. But if I don't try and people die who didn't have to die, I could never forgive myself. She felt rather than saw his nod of approval, and his voice came back quieter, more personal. You are unlike any white woman I have encountered, Sarah Coleman. You have courage that goes beyond foolishness into something I do not yet have words for. And you are unlike any Comanche warrior I was told to fear, Sarah responded, though I suppose I've only really met one, so my experience is limited. She felt his body shake slightly with what might have been laughter, and the sound made something warm bloom in her chest despite the cold wind and the danger ahead. They rode for over an hour, the landscape gradually changing from open prairie to more broken terrain with scattered trees and rocky outcroppings. Finally, as full darkness settled over the land and stars began to appear overhead, Sarah saw the glow of campfires ahead. Dakota slowed the horse to a walk as they approached the camp, and Sarah felt her nervousness return in full force. She could see teepees arranged in a loose circle, hear the sounds of people talking and moving about their evening tasks. As they entered the camp, those sounds gradually ceased as people noticed their arrival, or more specifically, noticed the white woman seated behind their chief. Dakota dismounted first, then helped Sarah down. She was immediately aware of dozens of eyes upon her, expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. She stood straight, refusing to show the fear that threatened to overwhelm her, keeping her eyes forward and her chin raised. An older man approached, his face deeply lined with age and experience. He spoke rapidly in the Comanche language, his tone sharp with questions and possibly anger. Dakota responded calmly, gesturing to Sarah several times during his explanation. The older man's eyes never left Sarah as Dakota spoke, his weathered face unreadable in the flickering firelight. Finally, he turned to Sarah and spoke in heavily accented English. I am Nahiosi, elder of this band and advisor to our chief. Dakota says you come with warning of a militia hunting our people. Why would a white woman risk herself to warn us? Sarah took a deep breath, aware that every word she spoke now could mean the difference between peace and bloodshed. Because the militia hunting you is hunting the wrong people. The raid on the Morrison Ranch this morning was not done by your band, but innocent Comanche will die if they encounter my father and the other settlers, and innocent settlers will die too, leaving more widows and orphans on both sides. This has to stop somewhere, and maybe it can stop here tonight if we act quickly. Nahiosi translated her words for the gathered crowd, and Sarah heard murmurs rippling through the assembled people. She saw women holding children close, young warriors with hands on their weapons, elders watching her with ancient, calculating eyes. A young warrior stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. Why should we trust her words? The white man speaks with a forked tongue. They promise peace while they steal our lands and slaughter our buffalo. This could be a trick to make us vulnerable. Dakota moved slightly, positioning himself between Sarah and the angry warrior. Kohana speaks from pain. His brother was killed by settlers 3 months ago, but I have observed this woman, and I believe she speaks truth. She came alone into the darkness to find me, risking everything to prevent bloodshed. That is not the action of someone seeking to deceive. Or it is the action of a clever spy, another voice called out from the crowd. Sarah felt the situation slipping away, felt the suspicion and anger in the air like something tangible. She stepped forward past Dakota's protective stance and raised her voice to address the entire camp. You're right to be suspicious. You're right to be angry. Your people have been betrayed and killed and pushed from your lands. I cannot undo those wrongs, and I cannot promise that my people will suddenly become trustworthy. But I can promise you this. I am not your enemy. I came here tonight because I met your chief, and I saw in his eyes the same thing I feel in my own heart. Exhaustion from the violence, hope for something better, and the courage to try to change what seems unchangeable. She paused, looking around at the faces watching her. In 4 days there is supposed to be a gathering for peace. If blood is spilled tonight between the militia and your people, that gathering will never happen. The chance for peace will die before it even begins. So I am asking you, help me stop this. Send riders to find the militia and explain that your band was not involved in the raid. Give peace one chance to survive. Nahiosi studied her for a long moment, then spoke quietly to Dakota in their language. The chief responded, and Sarah watched as the two men engaged in what was clearly a serious discussion. Finally, Nahiosi turned back to address the crowd, speaking in Comanche. When he finished, there was a moment of heavy silence before people began to disperse, some nodding, others shaking their heads in disagreement. The council will meet and decide, Nahiosi told Sarah. You will wait here. Dakota will see that you are safe. As the elder walked away toward one of the larger teepees, Sarah felt her legs suddenly weak with the release of tension. Dakota touched her elbow gently, guiding her toward a small fire away from the center of the camp. You spoke well, he said quietly as they sat down, with courage and truth. Not all are convinced, but you have given them something to consider beyond their anger and fear. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of the cold night air and the enormity of what she had done. What if they decide not to help? What if the militia finds your camp before the council makes a decision? Then we will face what comes, as we always have. Dakota's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the underlying tension. He retrieved a blanket from nearby and draped it around her shoulders. But I believe Nahiosi will convince the council. He is wise and sees further than most. He understands that this may be our last chance for peace before the army decides to drive us from these lands entirely. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the flames dance and spark. Sarah became acutely aware of Dakota's presence beside her, of the way the firelight played across his strong features, of the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. Why did you leave the gifts at my well? She asked suddenly, pulling the wooden flower from her pocket where she had carried it. The eagle feathers and this beautiful carving. Dakota looked at the wooden flower, and Sarah saw something soften in his expression. Among my people, such gifts have meaning. The eagle feathers represent honor and courage. The flower, I carved it because I could not stop thinking about the woman gathering wildflowers on the prairie, who looked at me without the hatred I usually see in white faces, who spoke to me as a person rather than as a savage to be feared or destroyed. Sarah's heart quickened at his words. I couldn't stop thinking about you either, she admitted quietly. My mother thinks I've lost my mind, spending so much time staring at the horizon. My brothers think the encounter frightened me so badly that I've become distracted. But the truth is, I kept hoping you would appear again. That is dangerous thinking, Sarah Coleman. But Dakota's voice held warmth rather than warning. You know as well as I do that there can be nothing between us. Our peoples are enemies. Any connection between a Comanche chief and a white settler's daughter would be seen as betrayal on both sides. I know, Sarah whispered. But knowing something is impossible doesn't always stop the heart from wanting it. Before Dakota could respond, Nahiosi emerged from the council teepee and approached them. His expression was grave, but not unkind as he looked at Sarah. The council has decided. We will send 3 of our fastest riders to intercept the militia. They will carry a white flag and offer to take representatives from the militia to our camp, where they can see for themselves that we were not involved in the raid. It is dangerous for our warriors to approach armed white men, but the risk must be taken if there is to be any hope for peace. Sarah stood quickly, her face flooding with relief and gratitude. Thank you. Thank you so much. You won't regret this decision. I hope you are right, young woman. But understand, if this goes wrong, if our riders are shot down or if treachery results from your words, the consequences will be severe. Trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. I understand, Sarah said solemnly, and I will do everything in my power to ensure my people honor this gesture. Nahiosi nodded, then turned to Dakota. You will take her back to her home before dawn. We cannot have her people discovering she was here, or they will never trust our intentions. This must appear to be our initiative alone. As Nahiosi walked away to organize the riders, Dakota stood and looked at Sarah. He is right. We must leave soon if I am to get you back before you are missed. But first you should eat something and rest for a short while. It will be a hard ride. Sarah followed him to another fire where an older woman was cooking a stew in a large pot. The woman looked at Sarah with curiosity but no hostility, and she ladled out a generous portion into a wooden bowl. The food was unfamiliar but warming, and Sarah realized she hadn't eaten since morning. As she ate, she watched the camp around her with new eyes. She saw mothers tending to children, men repairing weapons and tools, elders telling stories around fires. These were not the savage raiders of frontier nightmares. These were people, families trying to survive in an increasingly hostile world, clinging to their way of life as it was being systematically destroyed. A small girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, crept closer to Sarah, her dark eyes wide with curiosity. She reached out tentatively to touch Sarah's auburn hair, so different from her own black braids. Sarah smiled and lowered her head so the child could feel the strange texture. The girl giggled and ran back to her mother, who watched the interaction with a complicated expression that held both wariness and something that might have been hope. That is Kohana's daughter, Dakota said quietly. Her uncle, the brother Kohana spoke of, was killed while hunting, shot by settlers who thought any Comanche was fair game. The child has known nothing but fear and loss in her short life, and yet she still has the courage to approach a stranger, to see past the differences to simple curiosity. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. How do we fix this? How do we overcome so much pain and mistrust? I do not know if we can, Dakota admitted. But perhaps we start small, with one gesture of faith, one act of courage, one moment of choosing peace over violence, like what you did tonight, coming here alone, like what our council has chosen to do, sending riders to your people despite the danger. Hours passed as they waited for word from the riders. Sarah found herself telling Dakota about her life, growing up in Virginia before the war, her father's decision to move west for a fresh start, the challenges of frontier living, her dreams of one day seeing the ocean she had read about in books. In turn, Dakota spoke of his upbringing, learning the ways of his people from his father, the responsibility of leadership that had fallen to him when his father died 2 years ago, the impossible task of trying to protect his people while watching their world shrink around them. Do you ever wish you could just leave all of this behind? Sarah asked. Find some place where none of the conflict and violence could touch you? Dakota smiled sadly. Every day. But I cannot abandon my people, just as you could not abandon your family. We are bound by love and duty to the lives we were born into. That is both our strength and our burden. As the night deepened, Sarah felt herself growing drowsy, despite the tension of waiting. Dakota noticed and gestured to a pile of furs near the fire. Rest for a while. I will wake you when it is time to leave. Sarah wanted to protest, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. She lay down on the soft furs, pulling the blanket around her, and within moments was asleep. She dreamed of flowers growing across an endless prairie, of 2 figures walking side by side beneath a vast sky, of a world where love was not constrained by the accidents of birth and circumstance. She woke to Dakota's gentle touch on her shoulder. Sarah, the riders have returned. Come quickly. Sarah scrambled to her feet and followed him to where 3 warriors stood with their horses, speaking rapidly to Nahiosi and the council. As she approached, one of the riders turned to her and spoke in broken English. We found militia camp. They not attack first. We carry white flag, speak peaceful. The leader, older man with angry eyes and gray in beard. My father, Sarah breathed. Yes, maybe. He not trust at first, but we explain. We offer to bring him and 2 others to our camp at dawn, to see truth. He agree, but he say if trick, he will kill us all. The warrior's expression was grim. It is dangerous agreement, but it is chance. Dakota turned to Sarah, his expression serious in the pre-dawn darkness. I must get you home immediately. Your father and the others will arrive here within 2 hours, and you cannot be present when they come. If he discovers you were here, it will undermine everything we are trying to accomplish. He will think you conspired with us, and the trust we are building will shatter. Sarah nodded, understanding the necessity even as her heart rebelled against leaving before seeing this through. But what if something goes wrong? What if the militia doesn't believe you even after seeing your camp? Then we will face that challenge when it comes. But you have done all you can do, Sarah. You brought the warning that allowed us to act. Now you must trust that the seeds you planted will grow. Dakota placed his hand briefly on her shoulder, and even through the blanket she felt the warmth of his touch. Come, we ride now. They said quick farewells to Nayosi, who clasped Sarah's hand in both of his weathered ones. You have shown great courage, young woman. Whatever happens in the days ahead, know that you have given peace a fighting chance. That is no small thing. Sarah and Dakota mounted his horse once more, and they rode hard through the darkness, racing against the approaching dawn. The prairie was a shadowy landscape of shapes and sounds, and Sarah held tight to Dakota's waist as the powerful paint horse carried them swiftly toward her family's homestead. As they rode, Sarah's mind spun with questions and fears. What would her father think when he saw the Comanche camp and realized they truly had not been involved in the Morrison raid? Would it be enough to change his mind about attending the peace gathering? And what of her own feelings for the man she clung to now, this Comanche chief who had awakened something in her that she had never expected to feel? They were perhaps a mile from the Coleman homestead when Dakota suddenly pulled the horse to a stop. In the growing light of dawn, Sarah could see the buildings of her family's property ahead. Dakota dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. This is where I must leave you, he said quietly. You can walk the rest of the way and tell your family you rose early and went for a walk. They will be angry, but they will not suspect the truth. Sarah looked up at him, suddenly desperate to say so many things but unsure how to express any of them. Dakota, I know, he interrupted gently. I feel it too, this impossible thing that has grown between us in such a short time. But we must both be wise enough to recognize that acting on such feelings would destroy any chance for peace between our peoples. You understand this, yes? Understanding something and accepting it are 2 different things, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. In another world, in another time, but we live in this world in this time, Dakota said, though his eyes betrayed the same longing Sarah felt. And we must be strong enough to do what is right, rather than what we wish we could do. He reached into his shirt and pulled out a small leather cord from which hung a single turquoise stone, smooth and brilliant blue even in the dim light. This belonged to my mother. It is said to provide protection and bring good fortune. I want you to have it, to remember that not all meetings between our peoples must end in violence or sorrow. Some can end in understanding and hope. Sarah took the necklace with trembling fingers, closing her hand around the warm stone. I will treasure it always. And Dakota, she paused, gathering her courage. When the peace gathering happens in 3 days, will you be there? I will be there. It is why I have risked so much. Why my people have risked so much. We must try, even if the odds of success are small. He mounted his horse again, looking down at her one last time. Goodbye, Sarah Coleman. Whatever the future brings, know that you have shown me that bridges can be built between even the most divided peoples. That is a gift I will carry with me always. Not goodbye, Sarah said firmly. I'll see you at the gathering. My father will attend. I'll make certain of it. And when this peace is achieved, maybe then. Do not speak of maybes, Sarah. They will only bring you pain. Focus on the peace we both pray will come. With that, Dakota turned his horse and rode away, quickly disappearing into the landscape as the sun began to paint the eastern sky with shades of pink and gold. Sarah stood alone on the prairie, clutching the turquoise necklace to her heart. and allowed herself one moment of grief for the impossibility of what she felt. Then she straightened her shoulders, slipped the necklace beneath her dress where it would remain hidden, and walked toward her home. Her mother was already awake, frantically pacing in the front room when Sarah opened the door. Margaret's face went from fear to fury in an instant. "Sarah Elizabeth Coleman, where on earth have you been? I was about to wake your brothers to search for you. I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk. I needed to clear my head and think." And the lies came more easily than Sarah had expected, smoothed by necessity and the greater truth she was protecting. A walk? Before dawn? In the darkness? Have you completely lost your senses? Margaret grabbed her daughter by the shoulders. "Your father is out there somewhere, possibly in danger, and you're wandering around where anything could happen to you. I'm sorry, Mother. I've been so worried about Father, and I couldn't stay cooped up in here anymore." Sarah embraced her mother, feeling guilty for the deception, but knowing it was necessary. "Has there been any word?" "Nothing. Daniel rode to the Henshaw place an hour ago to see if there was news, but he hasn't returned yet." Margaret pulled back, studying her daughter's face. "There's something different about you. Something I can't quite name. Are you sure you're all right?" "I'm fine, Mother. Just tired and worried like you." Sarah moved toward the kitchen. "Let me make us some coffee. It's going to be a long morning." They had just finished their first cups when the sound of approaching horses brought them both to the window. Sarah's heart leaped as she saw her father riding up with Daniel and Matthew, all three men looking exhausted but unharmed. She rushed outside with her mother, relief flooding through her. Thomas dismounted heavily, his face showing the strain of a sleepless night. But there was something else in his expression, too. Something that looked like cautious hope. He embraced Margaret first, then pulled Sarah into a tight hug. "Thank God you're safe," Sarah whispered against his chest. "I've been so worried." "We're all safe, thanks to some surprising events." Thomas released her and looked at his family gathered around him. "Let's go inside. I have much to tell you, and most of it you won't believe." Once they were all seated around the kitchen table with fresh coffee, Thomas began his account. "We were tracking what we thought were the raiding party's movements when, around midnight, 3 Comanche warriors approached our camp under a white flag. I nearly shot them on sight, but something made me hold my fire. Maybe the fact that they were making themselves vulnerable by approaching us that way." Sarah forced herself to remain still, to show only the appropriate amount of surprise and interest, though her heart was pounding. "They told us, in broken English, that their band was not responsible for the Morrison raid. They claimed there was another group, renegade warriors who don't follow the main chiefs who have been conducting raids, and they offered to take me and 2 others to their camp at dawn to prove their innocence." Thomas shook his head in wonder. "I didn't trust it, thought it might be a trap. But Captain Morrison, whose ranch was hit, he said we should at least investigate before assuming all Comanche are guilty." "So you went to their camp?" Margaret asked, her face pale. "We did, and I'll be damned if they weren't telling the truth. We rode into their camp just as the sun was rising, and what we found was not a war party preparing for raids. It was families, women, children, elders. They had clearly been settled there for days, not riding out on raids. And their chief, a young man named Dakota, he spoke to us with more honesty and dignity than many white men I've known." Sarah's breath caught at the sound of his name from her father's lips, but she remained silent, letting him continue. "Dakota explained that his band has been trying to honor the peace, preparing for the gathering that's supposed to happen in 2 days. He said there are other Comanche who refuse to stop fighting, who see any peace with settlers as betrayal. He can't control what those warriors do any more than I can control every settler who might decide to shoot a Comanche on sight." Thomas looked around at his family. The man made sense, and more than that, he showed genuine sorrow over the violence on both sides. He told us about Comanche children who have been killed by soldiers, about hunting grounds that have been destroyed, about treaties that were broken. And you know what? He was right about most of it. "Thomas," Margaret began, concern in her voice. "I know, Margaret. I know it's complicated, and I know there's been wrong on both sides. But standing in that camp, seeing those families who are just trying to survive like we are, it changed something in me." Dakota asked if I would speak at the peace gathering, share what I saw, help convince other settlers that his band is genuinely trying for peace. And I agreed. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude and a dozen other emotions she couldn't name. Her father was going to the gathering. The peace process would continue. Everything she and Dakota had risked might actually lead to something real. "I'm proud of you, Father," she said quietly, "for being brave enough to see past the hatred and fear." Thomas looked at his daughter with curiosity. "You know, when Dakota was speaking to us, he said something strange. He said, 'There are those